And we're going.
Great. Hello, this is the MacEwan NDP podcast, and my name's Dominic Ellis Kelly, and I'm the president of this club.
My name is Aiden Tiro. I'm the VP of social media.
My name is Thomas Klein, and I'm the vice president.
My name is Nathan Blacklock, and I'm a member of the club.
And today we're going to be talking about recent legislation from the UCP in Alberta, Bills 30 and Bill 32. These are both very controversial bills and bills that they have tried to pass in a very quick order. So we're going to be discussing sort of our issues with the bills. Tom, you take it away.
So starting off with Bill 30, it's intended to cut approval times for private surgical facilities and allow the ministry to contract directly with doctors and allow private companies to take over for the administrative functions of physician clinics. And this is after they terminated the master agreement with the Alberta Medical Associations. Sorry, I'm looking through my notes. It basically allows for doctors to move to a fee-for-service model, which bills patients for each visit, and is basically moving towards an Americanized sort of healthcare, which the American healthcare system is flawed on many levels, including insurance and inaffordable healthcare. They changed the membership for professional colleges, complaint review committees, and hearing tribunals that regulate and discipline health professionals, such as physicians and nurses. It used to be 25% of the committees, complaint review committees had to be public citizens, and that is now up to 50%, which MLA David Shepherd criticized the move by stating it does not diversify the boards because the members are appointed by the government or the UCP, Jason Kenney. And before this, they had already tried to reduce wait times for lower risk surgeries to private facilities and issued a request for expression of interest to determine how many private contractors want to perform those publicly funded procedures. And it doesn't make much sense to me why the government would be funding private healthcare, because it's privately funded. It is not publicly funded. The government should be funding publicly funded healthcare. So, because it's publicly funded, so that means taxpayers' money. So they're using taxpayer money to pay for private healthcare.
Yeah, it's a little bit defeatist sounding, isn't it? Like, I mean, if the private healthcare system is apparently as efficient as the UCP thinks it is, then why does it need a government handout to run? Why can't it just run itself if it's that efficient?
Well, and this is all very clearly a part of their agenda, which they made clear pretty much from day one that they wanted to, despite Kenny's promises to not cut public health care, they made it very clear they were going to aspire to some American-style two-tier healthcare system. And, this is a system that every other developed country in the world, including ours, has implemented some form of a public healthcare system, except for the U.S. But now the UCP, with their ideological right-wing agenda, they want to take us back to before it was passed here in Canada federally. And, it's just an absolute shame. And I'm not overly surprised. As horrific as it is, I'm not horribly surprised that they're taking these measures. The only thing I find shocking, frankly, at this point is the fact that they're doing this in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah. The timing is for sure pretty sketchy, honestly. I mean, it's definitely up their alley, but like, it's a truly strange thing for the UCP to be doing right now, especially considering it's obviously not popular with doctors. It's not popular for its healthcare policy, and it's had some criticism for how it's handled the pandemic, with cases on the rise again, and with the obvious policy and personal gaffes by Minister Shandro. So It's obvious that Alberta's doctors no longer have confidence in this government. They're threatening to leave. They're threatening to potentially cripple rural Albertan municipalities if they do. So doing this during a pandemic is honestly, you have to wonder to what extent the UCP is they're actually governing for the people that they're trying to help, or if they're just doing it to advance their own agenda with no actual idea of how it's actually affecting people.
It's also, frankly, it goes against Section 7 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which states everyone has the the right to life, liberty, and security. So
You could argue that.
They could face a Charter of Rights and Freedoms issue there.
Well, again, just add that to the list of other potential charter violations with the other bills that this government has passed. But again, and one of which we'll be getting to later in this episode. But, and you mentioned Dominic. I mean, this government, they're not following they're not interested in what the physicians have to say. They're not interested in the fact they don't seem to even care much that they're threatening to leave this province, and they are leaving this province. I mean, we're already seeing the start of what MLA David Shepherd has, I think, quite fittingly referred to as just an exodus of rural healthcare physicians. I mean, it's not even just that they're not confident in this bill, they're not even confident in our health minister. 98% officially have said that they have zero confidence in Tyler Shandro, and yet Jason Kenney continues to stand by him. So I mean, it's just farcical about how far and how much damage is this government willing to do to our rural, especially in the rural municipalities, clinics and other facilities that provide healthcare before they finally abandon this ideological right-wing regressive agenda.
Well, part of the problem, I think, is that they're taking rural Alberta for granted. Like, in basically every election, the majority of rural ridings have sided with the UCP or the PCs or Wildrose, so they believe they can take the rural Albertan ridings for granted effectively. Though time will tell with that. We'll have to see how it plays out. But they know that put policies in place that don't benefit their own constituents, but their constituents and supporters will still back them. And the UCP frankly fears its base these days. It realizes that its base has become radicalized and has the potential to get even more radicalized and to switch over to separatist groups. So they have to keep an eye on their base. And to be honest, these policies aren't helping. Like, you would be thinking that they'd be attempting to give people things to shut them up about talking about separatism, but they seem more content to stoking the to fanning the flames of separatism, and they refuse to even commit to a legislative suggestion that the NDP put forward to commit it to a united federalist Canada. And if any other government did that, there would be serious consequences. I mean, there should logically be serious consequences for this, but they get away with a lot of things, honestly, and it's truly shocking that the people our province elected to be our heads of government are refusing to commit to a united federalist Canada.
I mean, at least they're doing a Donald Trump and doing something afterwards to get people's mind off the last thing that they did.
Well, that's exactly what they're doing it intentionally. I mean, that flies under the radar, just as whenever Trump, for people like when the SNC-Lavalin, I know obviously federally there's a news scandal being talked about, but when SNC-Lavalin was first big issue, I remember some folks seeing people in the States saying, this is your guys' big scandal, like this is a weekly thing here. But it's true, because that's exactly how Trump in the States and the Republicans are running the country. It's just every week it's something you can't keep track of, and that's what the UCP is doing. With all their corruption scandals and all these ridiculous ideological bills. I mean, they accuse the NDP of being ideological, but they're trying to privatize our healthcare system in a Canadian province. I mean, what do you call that?
Basically. I mean, like, it's insane, honestly. It's like they're fundamentally going against the principles of our country. the principles of our country is that we have a publicly funded healthcare system, and that's something that we like to pride ourselves on. We like to compare ourselves to the United States and say, well, we've got universal healthcare. And I mean, though the undertones of Canadian exceptionalism aside, I think that it's a valid point. Our healthcare system is better than theirs. We don't have to go broke to go to the hospital or anything like that. So it's something that makes us that keeps us as Canadians. And to think that the UCP is going against that shows that they're not really in this for the common people, and they have no respect for our nation, and all they care about is pandering to their own interests and to their corporate donors effectively.
Oh yeah, for sure.
To be honest, like we may compare ourselves to the United States and say how good our healthcare is, but frankly, we do need better healthcare compared.
No, I agree with that 100% as well.
Like we do not have the best mental health coverage. We do not have the best dental health coverage, etc., etc.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, we're the only country in, I mean, I know we're getting to federal politics now, but we are the only country to have a public healthcare system, but not a public pharmacare system, or have that healthcare system cover pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, like, for as much as we praise our healthcare system, we should also be somewhat critical of it, as we've mentioned, because obviously there's a lot of work to be done. Like, our welfare state did not cover anywhere near the ground that other states covered for their healthcare policies. Like, we have to pay. Our dental system is privatized. Our ear care and eye care system are privatized. Our pharmaceutical system is privatized. Our mental health care system is privatized effectively. And even ambulance rides are privatized, which is something I didn't know until this year. It's honestly insane. There are a lot of things that we've lost due to likely austerity budgets, or potentially not even putting them in place in the first place. So, I mean, to make a situation like this even worse is not what we need to be doing. We need to be expanding. We need to be getting Canadians the help they need effectively. And the Conservative parties on all these levels do not really understand this, in my opinion.
I mean, especially in the middle of a pandemic, right? We're in one of the worst situations possible, and they're cutting people's coverage and stuff. But back to the point of the doctors leaving, because I did actually want to add something to that, and then I kind of forgot to, when the conversation ended up completely separate from that topic. But I do believe that under the Emergency Act, the government does actually have the ability to legislate doctors to work.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
So,
yeah, wasn't there like I forget when it was, but it was like if doctors don't show up for work, then I don't know, I don't remember the full thing.
I believe they can be legally penalized. I'm not sure if it's just fines or if it's jail time, but yeah, like, given that we're in the middle of a pandemic, that might be their plan if doctors start leaving, is to just force them to stay. Because they can't remember when it was. I think it was like within a year of them getting, or I guess within 6 months of them getting office, they proposed a bill that would allow them to decide where doctors put up their practices in order to like improve coverage in rural areas, because that was one of their promises, right? And that faced a lot of opposition, right? Because it's sort of taking away people's rights if they want to become a doctor in the province. But
exactly. Like, you can't regulate people's mobility, and I'm honestly surprised that they'd be allowed to do that, to be honest. Considering, I mean, it's a free country. We are illegally able within the country and want to. So, EP is threatening legal loopholes to prevent doctors from leaving. Then that's also something that should be looked at. Like, we've known that they're assaulting our democracy in certain areas, so
for sure,
it would not surprise me.
Well, and that, I mean, it's sort of funny, they pride themselves on being the, anti-government overreach party. They talk about cutting red tape. They talk about, we're not going to dictate I mean, so it's sort of comedic that Tyler Shandro is now talking about having the government force doctors, force doctors to work, or, you can't, only a certain number of physicians are allowed to leave the province without a replacement, or force them to find some replacement who's willing to put up with the UCP tearing up their contracts. I mean, it's kind of farcical just how anti-free, how anti-free market this government has acted with our healthcare system.
Well, it's not even only our healthcare system, right? They've chosen clear winners in other aspects of the economy too, right?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's almost a joke. Especially, I mean, not to get into the conversation about economic diversification, that's for another day. But again, that's another big one. You're a big oil company, you don't have to pay a cent in taxes to rural municipalities.
No.
Yeah, they're skyrocketing the taxes because I believe, aren't they footing rural municipalities with some of the bills for cleaning up abandoned oil wells and stuff? And
Yeah.
they're also like, I know taxes could be going up, and there have been protests at the legislature from people from rural municipalities. And so obviously the elected officials in charge of a lot of these cities are they're not having any of this. And if that leads to more people in these areas seeing what the UCP is doing and understanding that their vision is not positive for most of the people in this province, then that's a potential positive, though we can't count on it. Like, obviously, the party and the media and everyone else has to do their work to get these communities on board, like establishing EDAs and having events and just kind of being in the community, getting people around, and maybe even altering our campaign tactics to some extent.
Oh,
Yeah.
we need a massive overhaul in our campaign tactics. Because last time, it was like we were afraid to defend ourselves economically. But you bring up an important point, which is that these folks being, and quite rightly, ticked off at the UCP, and even potentially not voting for the UCP does not mean votes for the NDP. There was a poll recently that showed, well, there are two things. One, if an provincial election was held right now, UCP would still form government. However, it also showed that the majority of Albertans want a new government. So there needs to be, I think, a massive overhaul in our messaging.
That's a reasonable suggestion, I think. I mean, from what it seems from that data, it seems like people are tired of the UCP's antics, but they don't see a clear alternative yet. So that's something we need to work on. And I've also seen support for the third parties go up in polls. Like I saw the Alberta Liberals polling at 14% once, which was somewhat surprising considering they've been pretty much non-existent for the past 8 years or something. So, or since at least 2015, and they lost their one seat in 2019. So yeah, which is interesting. I mean, I guess there are some Albertans who are looking for an alternative, and a lot of people see the NDP as being far left, which is, in my opinion, erroneous. But at the same time, it's not, to some extent, it's not up to us to criticize how people think of us. It's up to us to correct misinterpretations, I suppose. So
Yeah.
The thing is that people still view socialism as bad just because of communism, which democratic socialism and communism is not the same thing.
Well, yeah, I mean,
communism
people
and
aren't.
what people think are communism aren't the same thing, right? It's very widely misinterpreted. Can't tell you how many times I've heard Rachel Notley be called a communist. But,
Yeah. Well, it's I don't even know if the label I would really put is democratic socialism or any kind of social. I would say almost more social democracy. And I like it's, the stimula around it is frustrating, and it is puzzling to think how we're gonna break through that for the next election, and essentially save this province from the ridiculous austerity. But I almost think the choice has to be that to Albertans. It's like, look, you can call us socialists, you can call us communists all you want, but the alternative is a private healthcare system, crumbling education system, these massive tax cuts that favor certain particular corporations that are not creating any jobs. I mean, that's the alternative, really.
Yeah, I think the party would have to be a lot clearer about how that affects individual communities, though, because there's a lot of people around here in small town Ritterheim that don't give a crap about the schooling system because they're all retirees, right?
Yeah. That's the thing. And I mean, the UCP's base of support is stronger among older people, and these older people are naturally hostile to, like, they were raised in the time when the Red Scare and the Cold War were a threat. So naturally, a lot of people associate socialism or even progressivism with, like, the scary, evil communist ideology that they were taught to fear from a young age. So it's hard to break that mold sometimes. And I mean, people often will vote against the interests of people other themselves. Like, as Nathan was saying, some older people don't care about the education system in some capacity because it's not something they benefit from. And a lot of people think the education system is indoctrinating children into becoming socialists. So that's another barrier to break through effectively. And I know that there are issues that some of us are more concerned with than others. And that's just the way that a lot of people are. Like, people obviously, Alberta's voters obviously didn't care about certain issues in the last election, but they did care about other issues. So we need to find out what priorities are and be able to balance it effectively.
Well, I think, I mean, healthcare is something that, speaking healthcare is a language that I think a lot of people understand. People have their family doctors, they rely on their nurses. And I got to tell you, out of all the nursing students that I've talked to at MacEwan at our school, many, I don't think I've talked to a single one who, under this current government, even before Bill 30, who have not said that they're not at the very least considering leaving the province as soon as they get their degree. And that's scary. And you can't even blame them. And we're going to see other provinces and territories, I think, benefiting from just how badly this government is destroying our public healthcare system. And to bring it back to Bill 32, I mean, just it's almost a joke just how outrageous they're, like it's like they're just playing a game. How mad can we make our public healthcare officials?
Yeah.
Not just them, they're screwing over with this either.
Yeah, it's truly bizarre. Like, you would almost think that they actually plan to, like, offend healthcare workers as badly as they have. Like, it's truly difficult to understand, and I don't know why they're doing it. Like, they're going after people who are being viewed as heroes during this pandemic, so it's just something I don't understand. And also, for what Aiden was saying, I do definitely predict that we'll see an exodus of healthcare workers and just young people in general too. Like, Alberta currently has the youngest population in Canada, but I foresee that changing if Kenny doesn't fix the economy soon. Like, people are going to want to get out of here and find jobs in BC and Ontario and other provinces. So that's something that Kenny needs to be concerned about.
Why would we want to stay here when, like, Quebec, for example, has like so few young workers that the restaurant industry is struggling to hire like waitresses and waiters, right? Like, doesn't make any sense, especially when half of us can speak French. I don't think it's half, but a fair amount of us can speak French.
Some of us, I mean, I can, though. I don't know a lot of francophones in Alberta, to be honest. Like, they definitely have them, but I haven't met a ton, to be honest. But still, regardless, on the point, like, if Quebec is having, like, a staffing crisis in their province, then I can honestly foresee Albertans and people from, like, other smaller provinces that are being ravaged by austerity flocking there. Considering they're quite pleased with their leadership, and I foresee their economy doing well in the future if they can overcome the worst of the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, I only have like one francophone friend that I'm aware of. I mean, that I haven't seen in a really long time because COVID.
Yeah,
I went through French immersion, so my lens may be a bit more colored, but
yeah, same. I was in French immersion for a few years too, and both my parents speak French, so
nice.
I definitely am like that.
I grew up in Sherwood Park.
I have a friend from Sherwood Park.
All right, just checking the time here. So does anybody, because we do have two bills, of course, we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about Bill 30, but we also have Bill 32 to get to. And I think Tom also has some words prepared on that. So I don't know if anybody wanted kind of some last words on Bill 30 before we probably move on.
I will say that Dominic was questioning the motives behind the UCP and, like, even attacking the doctors. And the only thing that comes to my mind is blaming it on the unions, like attacking the unions in the public eye. Because, that has been the long-time enemy of the kind of conservative political parties,
Exactly.
right? Where the Wild Rose, PC, or now the UCP, which is basically the Wild Rose in blue.
Yeah.
Like it just it's the only thing that makes sense, right?
Yeah, the posts that I'm seeing by them on social media are consistent with that, though. The messaging is a bit different. Like they like to say the UCP stands with unionized workers, but the NDP stands with the big union bosses. So they're finding a way to frame it in a way that's palatable to their base. And
Mhm.
honestly, it's a fairly decent political strategy that I think can take off. Though to what extent it's actually true is up for debate, obviously.
And I think that's actually a good note. Oh, I see, Tom.
Um, frankly, we now have the word shantrum, which is Tyler Sandro. Well, sorry, him throwing a tantrum.
Shady Shandy. Yeah, well, actually, just some last words on Tyler Shandro. Because speaking of the Shandrum, there's, when we think about Tyler Shandro, we think about that incident. We just think about the fact that he had the cojones to drive over to a physician in the middle of a pandemic, and to go scream at him in front of his family for posting a meme about him on Facebook. That's the bit we think about with why is this.
That's what
How
it
is
was
this guy
about.
fit to be? Yeah, how is this guy fit to be our health minister, or any minister for that matter, in our government? But I think the part about that story everybody tends to forget is what the meme itself was about and why he was so ticked off. And the reason why is because the meme itself called him out on a conflict of interest. They have a vested interest, him and his wife, the firm they own, they have a vested interest in privatizing our healthcare system provincially. That's just more money for them. And it's important to remember that when we look at Tyler Shandro, we look at decisions that the UCP are making in regards to our healthcare. I don't even have any words for it.
Aren't ministers supposed to like cut all ties to any corporations that may?
His name is now no longer it, but his wife. So
Okay, so it's a conflict of interest, but it's not a conflict of
even
interest.
that, I don't think that should be allowed, quite frankly. But whatever.
It shouldn't, but that's one of the legal
Exactly.
loopholes that
Yeah.
the
Yeah, it's a loophole that the ethics
abusing.
commissioner also uses. Because, for example, the ethics commissioner has been, in my opinion, very lenient with the UCP during their time in government, and I think there's a motive behind that. Because I read an article recently found that ethics commissioner Marguerite Tressler's husband is a high-ranking UCP donor, and he's part of a law firm and that's connected to other law firms, and there are quite a few UCP donors on that list. So you would think that that's an obvious conflict of interest, and that the ethics commissioner's mere presence as the ethics commissioner is an obvious conflict of interest because she has a partisan affiliation, or her husband has a partisan affiliation with the UCP. Though I guess spousal connections don't necessarily mean conflicts of interest in our climate, which is something that I disagree with personally, but I guess that's the way it is for now.
But even if there was no conflict of interest, I'd say the ethics commissioner has probably seen what happened when our elections commissioner, Lauren Gibson, tried to stand up to Jason Kenney and his corruption, with finding his friends $200,000. All of a sudden, they snuck into a cost reduction bill. Oh, we no longer need an elections commissioner, just while in the middle of an investigation by the elections commissioner.
Exactly. And that's some extremely authoritarian behavior right there, and you would think it's an obvious conflict of interest, but no, apparently it isn't. I don't necessarily what constitutes a conflict of interest, but if there is anything it is, then that is definitely a candidate, personally, I think. Anyways, back to Tyler Shandro. I just opened his Wikipedia article, and I just found that he actually doesn't have any experience with healthcare himself. I was under the impression that he was a past doctor, but it looks like he isn't. He's a full lawyer who's been on several boards, including served on the Calgary Police Commission, which is interesting given the times.
Excuse me. You have got to be kidding me.
I didn't know that, actually. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I just found it out now. I just looked up his Wikipedia page to see if there was any more information, and Yes, that's definitely
I mean, I guess
somewhat concerning, potentially.
That is absolute nonsense.
well, I guess we know why he's unable to have any kind of reasonable action towards physicians, towards healthcare professionals, because he himself has never been one.
Yeah.
I mean, there is. You could write a book of the reasons why he should not be health minister. But I think unless anybody has any last words to say about Mr. Shand,
If he comes to my house because I just criticized him, I will take it as a badge of honor.
Yeah, film it.
Right.
Like, legit film it, and we can share it on platforms and stuff, and yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
And to be fair, I don't believe their health minister is a doctor, Sarah Hoffman, who I believe she was public school trustee before being elected, though I'm not entirely sure her experience. So I guess you don't have to be a doctor to do a good job as a health minister, but at the same time, Mr. Shand's connections to the private through his connections to the privatizing agency is somewhat concerning. So that's what I'm getting at actively.
Well, Sarah Hoffman, I don't think at any point had a 98% disapproval rating among physicians. So clearly there's
Certainly hope not.
to have operated. But yeah, unless anybody had any other final thoughts on Bill 30 before we wrap up, I do want to go back because Nathan, you brought up the government's attitude to unions, and I think that ties in beautifully with what we're going to be talking about next, Bill 32. And I will let Tom kind of take the floor on that.
So this is a long list of changes that Bill 32 does. Notice of group terminations, the amount of time that an employer has to pay an employee, like the time span for their final pay upon termination of employment, calculation of general holiday pay, permitted deductions from employee earnings, temporary layoffs, hours or work averaging, youth jobs, accumulation of vacation time during leave of absence, rest periods, the ability to override certain employment standard codes provisions in a collective bargaining agreement, union dues and financial disclosure, first contact arbitration, picketing, remedial certification, the reverse unis rule. I'm not pronouncing that correctly. Do not correct. Don't give me crap for it. But it's a legal proposition that requires an accused person to prove or disprove something, such as an element of an offense or a defense, early renewal of a collective agreement, consequences of prohibited practices by a union, union disciplinary powers, the inclusion of nurse practitioners, which during a pandemic is not good. Certain labor relation rules that are specific to the construction industry, the powers of an arbitrator, and the powers of the Alberta Labor Relations Board. So I'd say the main things that to come out of this is like vacation pay, picketing, youth jobs, layoffs, just everything, honestly. But those are the main things.
Yeah, I mean the bill itself. I mean it's so comedic that it's referred to as the rebalancing the workplace with this idea that the unions have become too powerful, and these poor employers, these have lost all their control, so now they need to rebalance it. Well, rebalance it is essentially it's a union bust bill. That's exactly what it is. They are attacking unions' bargaining rights. They are, and people when we talk about unions, we need to understand they are the last constitutional defense against complete exploitation
Mhm.
by companies to their workers. It's an absolutely necessary element of our market. But this government, they seem to have this very draconian vision, and I think this kind of ties into the way they treat our physicians, where they sort of look at workers and they say, "Hey, if you don't, I'm the boss. If you don't do, if you don't like it, you can go work somewhere else." Um, and yeah, it's you. Okay, I'll let somebody else talk.
To add on to what you were saying, like it gives me the impression that they have like a Adam Smith level view of free market, where like um, if the workers are unsatisfied working for their current company, they will leave. The current company will go bankrupt, and another will rise to take its place. Which is all well and good, but in our current economy, there's no jobs for that, right? Like, isn't it like 30% of Canadians are living paycheck to paycheck?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, no, it's. I mean, I, I completely disagree with the notion that the unions were too powerful before. And Dominic, I think you brought up earlier the way that they're trying to politically frame this. They're framing it as we stand with the union workers, and it's those gosh dang corrupt, inept union bosses that are. Unions are democratic organizations. You
That they
elect
are.
your union leader. You elect your union executive as the workers. I mean, this whole idea that one is separate from the other is absurd. While they're putting in a piece of legislation that says that your employer can force you to work overtime and then not pay you that extra for working overtime hours, time and a half, which many workers rely on to make ends meet. They they still tell you they're on your side.
That's it. Though at the same time, I have actually heard of a few people who believe that union dues are too expensive, that often union members have to pay extra to be part of like the decision-making process. For some workers, it's quite a bit. So that's potentially something to look at. Perhaps unions need to look at their internal structure and see what they're doing. Like, obviously, they're positive institutions, but perhaps they have to do a bit of look inside themselves well, though obviously the ideological bias against the UCP is concerning.
Well,
Mhm.
that's to the union. I mean, and yeah, I think you're completely right. There are many unions that do need reform, but that reform should not come in a top-down union-busting bill by a right-wing government.
Exactly.
Absolutely not. I mean, the
Leave them to figure it out themselves. I know that I know if unions reform, they're qualified to do it themselves, I think.
mhm. I mean, right wing governments have been attacking and busting unions for as long as unions have been around, right? Whether it was Thatcherism in the UK or uh, to their original forming back when Marx formed them in the Industrial Revolution, right? Like they are the enemy
Exactly. I mean,
of
this is exactly up the conservatives'
the free
alley, and
market.
exactly. And with Margaret Thatcher, like my dad grew up in the Thatcher depression in East England, and it's not something that anyone should be proud of. Like Jason Kenney constantly praises Margaret Thatcher, the EP constantly praises Margaret Thatcher, and if you actually lived in that time, you wouldn't be seeing her. You would be seeing what actually happened and how hard it was, how her austerity budgets negatively impacted people, how her policies against LGBT people and women impact people. So obviously, it simply frustrates me when I hear UCPers praising a figure that's had so much negative influence on the world, and it's ideological, has no basis in objective analysis or reality.
Well, I mean, that can be said about both sides, though, right? Not to say that the NDP are
Oh
socialists or
yes, of course.
anything, but you hear constant praise, especially on more social media like sites like Reddit and Instagram about like communist regimes and how all the good they did, right? But that's just
No, I
ideological
agree with that as well. I've
blinding.
seen people unironically now on social media, and it's
Oh yeah, How's a
Yeah.
giant famine gets praised?
Whoever these people are, I myself am not following them because I have not, must say I've not seen that.
Yeah, I don't follow these accounts. Like, occasionally I'll look something up to just see what people are talking about, and I'll comment this. But anyway, that's a little bit topic. So
Yes.
let's get back to Bill 30.
Oh, Tom.
Next, the picketing
Okay.
portion of Bill 32 that connects back to Bill 1, which we did a podcast on. Go check that out, please and thank you. That'd be great. And it also connects to Bill 30 because, well, with Bill 1, that's the protest bill. That's basically making any protest that the government disagrees with illegal. And it connects to Bill 30 because with doctors and their unions wanting to protest this, nurses and nurses and then I don't know if doctors have unions. Don't quote me on this. I'm uneducated on the topic. However, it connects back to those people in the medical field protesting and holding rallies at the legislature to get what they want in legislation.
I mean, nursing and teacher strikes are not at all uncommon for this province, right? I think there was a nursing strike like earlier on in the year, wasn't there? Or threats of one at least.
Yeah, I believe so. I think there might have been one at one point. Weren't Boilermakers striking at one point if they're not still striking?
Perhaps. Not sure.
That's what I heard. I mean, like, these bills are obviously in response to what the public has expressed. Like, the public, significant people in the, like, electorate are clearly unhappy with what this government's doing. Like, we're seeing these huge protests directly criticizing the government, and obviously the UCP they said they anticipated it, but I don't know if they quite anticipated it to this level, so perhaps they still one is necessary to count on the protest, though that's authoritarian and should be avoided, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Because the backlash against this government is truly fascinating. It's honestly inspiring to see that people are waking up. They're seeing the problems that the Kenney government is causing to their families and to the businesses, people they care about. So it's honestly inspiring to see that there's some Albertans who are willing to stand for their rights, stand for other people, effectively do what they need to do to protect others and have solidarity. At the end of the day, that's part of what keeps going in politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I know, of course, Unifor and CUP, or excuse me, not CUP, the Alberta Federation of Labor have made it clear to the government once this passed. I think who was it that directly said, we'll see you in court? And they are going to keep fighting the good fight for workers' rights. And they are going to keep taking this government to task over this bill, as will the NDP opposition. Because again, this is, it's just, there's almost a complete ignorance of what unions are, or a willing ignorance of the function of unions to protect workers' rights. But of course, the government's not interested in that. They're not, we really need to, as a party, get the message out there that, look, this is not a workers' party. This is a corporate party. This is a party that is just passed a bill that says your boss can force you to work overtime hours again and not be paid for it. Sorry, Tom.
The only people that the UCP care about is corporations and the rich. They do not care about the middle class. They do not care about the lower class. They only care about the rich. And they only want to make their corporate buddies who pay them for their campaigns richer.
I think that's a fair analysis given the legislation we've seen.
Especially with the current, if you've analyzed the budgets that they have passed, with the tax cuts and giving money to corporations and taking away money from the lower class and the middle class, they do not care about us.
Yeah, they're tacitly raising taxes on people too by bumping people up into different tax brackets. So that's something else to be looked at. They campaigned on not raising taxes, and they still claim that they haven't raised taxes, but it looks like they are to an extent by moving people up in tax brackets. And while higher taxation isn't necessarily a bad idea, it's an example of UCP being secretive, and it's also been voted as the secretive government in Canada, which is a title I think it's truly warranted at this point. And obvious taxation can be hard for certain families, especially coping in a recession like this. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, people were criticizing the NDP's taxes. However, if I remember correctly, in some areas, the UCP is taxing us much more than the NDP ever did.
Yeah.
So, and instead of actually investing it back in the province, they're investing it in oil corporations who fire their employees and leave the province.
Well, yeah, it's going into subsidies like straight away, right? And that's pretty much all the money is being used for. I do believe that the higher tax brackets were a bit more under the NDP, but um, I think like lower income people are feeling it quite a bit more under the UCP.
yes, I mean, like, this is merely a crisis of, in large part, our economic troubles are caused by the private sector, but it's the public sector that has to pay for it. We as the public sector and people who are employed in education or government or healthcare, like, it's us who are paying for the economic issues we technically have no control over. So if you put it into that perspective, it's honestly all baffling.
Well, I mean, that's not just like, unfortunately, that's not just the UCP thing, right? Like the SNC Lavalin scandal was entirely to save face because like SNC Lavalin employs what, good 200,000 people. It went like started coming under scrutiny because it was under legal investigation. Like its stock price would go down. They'd have to lay people off. That looks bad for the government.
Well, and there was
Definitely, yeah.
Oh, and also to the audio that was leaked showed the direct concern was because Justin Trudeau's riding that he's an MP of is in Quebec, and they were quite concerned with it being an election coming up that year that was going to affect their results in Quebec. Which, ironically, I mean they didn't exactly do stellar in Quebec either with the return of the Bloc Québécois to prominence.
Yeah, well,
Sorry, that's federal politics, of course.
Exactly. Like, we have to know that everybody can be guilty, or everybody can be guilty of corruption, though you have to consider the level of the corruption too. So, yeah. And you have to consider skills. Like, we know that some politicians naturally predestined to abuse their power, and we know that that's not necessarily confined to one side. Yeah.
absolutely not. Like there's some people that don't even like are basically ideological
Oh, yeah.
chameleons, right? They're not really there for because they believe in the subject. They're just there to get the paycheck, right?
Oh yeah, well any MLA I would say that was on was supportive of Jim Prentice and Alice at the time, or Ed Stelmach, for instance. I was about to say Alison Redford, but of course everybody turned on her for doing ironically the same thing that both Ralph Klein and currently Jason Kenney has done, but they got away with it, of course. But anyone that supported Jim Prentice or Ed Stelmach while they were in the legislature and is now a UCP MLA, I mean that just shows you they are an ideological chameleon. Because this is not the old PC brand that folks have been for generations.
Not at all.
No, this is most definitely the Wild Rose, right? Like it's
with an additional heap of corruption scandals on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it's Wild Rose plus something completely different, like Wild Rose plus Donald Trump.
Yeah.
There's definitely a right-wing populist element to this UCP government, I think.
I don't know. It's weird because like traditionally when like you think right wing economically, like you think freer markets, right? But what they've been doing is not freer markets at all, right? They've been choosing clear winners in the markets. So
yeah, it's obvious where their priorities are.
Yeah.
And their unwillingness to diversify the economy is somewhat capitalist to some extent, in my
Oh, but
opinion.
that's just
Like, it goes against basic economic principles. Like, you want to have as many assets as possible. So,
oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, we learned that in Econ 101, right? But or I guess 102 because 102 is macroeconomics. But um, like it's a clear case of pandering to like their oil worker base, right? Because that was a big concern in the last election was oil workers losing their jobs because of the advent of clean.
yeah. And their base also has a lot of small business owners, to my notes, like a lot of used car dealerships and this restaurant association. There's a website called theucp.ca that basically talks about like who is backing the UCP, and it's worth a look at looking to considering which businesses to support and which business not to support.
Mm-hmm.
That's potentially something to look at. I've been looking at it as potentially evaluating my consumerism.
And sorry, Dominic, could you say that website one more time? I might put it in the once this uploads on both on YouTube and on the several podcast platforms we're on. I might go ahead and put that link in the description.
Yeah. So it's firetheucp.ca, and it states that basically the major donors and the major companies and associations that are donating to the UCP.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Oh yes, and by the way, for folks, just a bit of podcast business while while we're kind of on the subject, kind of peeking behind the curtain. So we are listed on iTunes. We are listed on Google Podcasts. Currently waiting to hear from a few other platforms. Update as that comes along. But yeah, so a few different areas you guys can check us out at. And was there any other thoughts anybody had specifically on Bill 32?
I don't think so.
I think I've covered pretty much everything I want to say on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for as much of a, even though this is a big omnibus bill, I mean, there's only really so much you can actually. So, I mean, it is just what it is. It's a top-down, anti-union, union busting bill. I mean, that's anti-worker, it's just there's it goes so far. There's almost not even enough words to like talk about it in depth. That's just what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And was there any final thoughts on just kind of what we've talked about in general this podcast, Bills 30 and 32? Any of the other areas we went to in the conversation?
Not for me, no.
Alrighty. Well, stay tuned for next time, everybody. Then I think we'll go ahead and sign off here. This has been the MacEwan NDP Club podcast, signing off.